They thought she was just a gold digger who got lucky. They thought stripping her of her title, her home, and her dignity would break her. When Vivian Hayes signed those divorce papers in absolute silence, her husband and his cruel mother laughed, believing they had won. They expected her to disappear into the shadows of poverty. They were wrong. 3 weeks later, the roar of a Gulfstream G650 silenced the tarmac at the year's most exclusive gala. The door opened, and the woman who stepped out wasn't the broken ex-wife they knew. She was someone else entirely, and she had come to collect a debt that money couldn't pay. The scratching of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the expansive, mahogany-paneled library. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows of the Hayes estate in upscale Connecticut, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to mock the devastation happening inside. Vivian Hayes sat straight-backed in the leather armchair. She didn't look at the man sitting across from her. Preston Hayes, the man she had loved for 5 years, the man who was currently checking his Patek Philippe watch with an air of bored impatience. Standing behind Preston was his mother, Beatrice Hayes. Beatrice was a woman who wore her cruelty like she wore her vintage Chanel pearls, proudly and conspicuously. "Just sign it, Vivian," Beatrice snapped, her voice sharp and grating. "Don't drag this out. We all know you're trying to calculate how much alimony you can squeeze out of my son, but the prenup is ironclad. You get what you came in with, which, if I recall correctly, was a suitcase full of nothing." Vivian looked up. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears left. She had cried them all 3 nights ago when she found Preston in their bed with Tiffany, the daughter of a rival pharmaceutical CEO. Preston hadn't even apologized. He had simply sighed, run a hand through his hair, and told her that it was time to be realistic about their compatibility. "I don't want alimony," Vivian said softly. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Preston scoffed, finally looking up from his watch. "Oh, come on, Viv. Don't play the martyr. My lawyers said you might try to fight for the lake house. It's not happening." "I don't want the lake house," she repeated. "I don't want the apartment in the city. I don't want the car." She looked down at the document. Decree of dissolution of marriage. It stated clearly that Vivian was to vacate the premises immediately. She was to cease using the Hayes surname socially within 30 days. She was to receive a settlement of $5,000, a final insult calculated by Beatrice to make Vivian feel like a dismissed servant rather than a wife of 5 years. Vivian picked up the pen. "Make sure you initial the bottom of page 4, the family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, instructed without making eye contact. He seemed embarrassed to be part of this, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Vivian didn't hesitate. She signed her name. Vivian Hayes, the last time she would ever write it. She closed the folder and slid it across the heavy desk. "Done," she whispered. Beatrice snatched the folder up immediately, flipping through the pages as if expecting Vivian to have written a curse in invisible ink. When she saw the signatures, a smug, reptilian smile spread across her face. "Finally," Beatrice breathed out. "God, Preston, I told you 5 years ago this day would come. Mixed-status marriages never work. She was a waitress, for heaven's sake. You can't turn a stray cat into a show dog." Preston stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at Vivian with a mix of pity and relief. "Look, Viv, it's for the best. You were never really comfortable in this world. You'll be happier back in yours." "My world," Vivian echoed. "You know." Preston waved a hand vaguely. "Simple. Quiet. Without the pressure of galas and board meetings. I'll have the driver take you to the train station." "No." Vivian stood up. She was wearing a simple beige trench coat and black slacks. She looked elegant, despite the circumstances, but to them, she just looked plain. "I called a cab. It's waiting at the gate." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A cab? How fitting. Make sure you don't take any of the silverware on your way out." Vivian paused. For a second, the air in the room grew heavy. She turned her gaze to Beatrice. It was a look so cold, so devoid of the submissiveness she had shown for 5 years, that Beatrice actually faltered, her smile twitching. "Goodbye, Beatrice," Vivian said. "I hope the price of your son's happiness was worth it." She walked out of the library, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the foyer. Her bags were already by the door. 2 modest suitcases. She didn't look back at the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier, or the life she had tried so hard to build. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, she stepped into the rain. The taxi was idling by the wrought iron gates. She got in, soaked to the bone. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing her through the rear-view mirror. Vivian took a deep breath. She pulled a burner phone from her pocket, not the iPhone Preston paid for, but a simple device she had bought yesterday. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 years. It rang once. "This is the Blackwood private line," a deep, gruff voice answered. "Who is this?" "It's me, Grandpa," Vivian said, her voice finally breaking. "I'm done. I'm coming home." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a tone of fierce, protective authority. "It's about damn time, Sienna," the voice growled, using her real middle name. "The jet is already in Teterboro. We've been waiting for you." 2 weeks had passed since Vivian left the Hayes estate. For Preston Hayes, life had returned to what he considered normalcy. The divorce was finalized with record speed, thanks to the judges in his father's pocket. The house was quieter, but he told himself it was a relief. No more Vivian asking him to stay in for movie nights. No more Vivian looking out of place at his business dinners, wearing dresses that were a season old because Beatrice refused to let her have a proper wardrobe budget. He was free. "You look dashing, darling," Beatrice cooed, adjusting Preston's bow tie. They were standing in the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel. Tonight was the Starlight Charity Gala, the most important social event of the New York calendar. It was a gathering of the old money elite, the titans of industry, and the political powerhouses. More importantly, it was the night Preston was going to announce the merger between Hayes Industries and the Sterling Group, Tiffany's father's company. "Is Tiffany ready?" Preston asked, checking his reflection. He looked tired, though he wouldn't admit it. "She's waiting in the lobby," Beatrice said, beaming. "She's wearing a custom Versace. Now that is the kind of woman you should be seen with, someone who understands the value of image." Beatrice poured herself a glass of champagne. "I haven't heard a peep from the waitress since she left. I assume she's back in whatever trailer park in Ohio she crawled out of." Preston felt a twinge of guilt, but he shoved it down. "She's from a small town in Oregon, Mother, and she's probably fine. She's resilient." "She's a nobody," Beatrice corrected him. "And now we can finally erase that mistake from our history. Tonight is about the future. The Hayes name is going to be stronger than ever." They took the limousine to the gala venue, a massive private hangar at JFK Airport that had been converted into a ballroom for the evening. The theme was aviation and innovation, fitting for the crowd. As they arrived, the paparazzi cameras flashed blindingly. Preston posed with Tiffany on his arm. She was blonde, statuesque, and looked at the cameras with the practiced hunger of a socialite who lived for attention. "Preston! Preston!" a reporter shouted. "Is it true the merger is happening tonight?" "You'll have to wait and see," Preston winked. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Champagne flowed, a live orchestra played, and billions of dollars of net worth mingled in the room. However, There was an undercurrent of murmurs rippling through the crowd. "Did you hear?" a man near the bar whispered to his companion. The guest list was amended an hour ago. Amended? By who? The Blackwood Corporation. Preston froze as he overheard the name. The Blackwood Corporation was a myth, a ghost story in the business world. It was a European conglomerate with fingers in everything from shipping to aerospace, but the family behind it was notoriously reclusive. They were old money, older than the Hayes, older than the Rockefellers. They were royalty without the crowns. "What's wrong?" Tiffany asked, noticing Preston's pale face. "Nothing," Preston muttered. "Just rumors. Someone said the Blackwoods are here." Beatrice laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. The Blackwoods haven't attended a public event in New York in 20 years. They live in their castles in Switzerland and ignore the rest of us." Suddenly, the music stopped. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the hangar, which led directly to the private tarmac, began to part. The sound of a jet engine whining down could be heard outside. It was loud, powerful, and close. The massive hangar doors slowly began to slide open, revealing the night sky and the wet tarmac glistening under the floodlights. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Parked just 50 yards away was a sleek, matte black Gulfstream G700, the most expensive private jet in the world. But it wasn't just any jet. On the tail, painted in subtle gold, was the crest of a roaring lion holding a chess piece, the Blackwood crest. "My God," Beatrice whispered, clutching her pearls for real this time. "It is them." A ramp extended from the jet. The crowd held its breath. First, 2 security guards in impeccably tailored suits descended. Then an older man with silver hair and a cane walked down. Arthur Blackwood, the patriarch, a man Preston had only seen in business textbooks. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back, extending a hand. A woman stepped into the light. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her figure, with a slit that went up to her thigh. Diamonds, real, heavy, flawless diamonds, glittered at her throat and ears. Her hair, once kept in a modest bun by Preston's request, now cascaded in dark, luscious waves down her back. She descended the stairs with the grace of a queen and the predator-like focus of a hawk. As she stepped onto the red carpet leading into the hangar, the light hit her face. Preston dropped his champagne glass. It shattered, the sound echoing in the silent room. Tiffany gasped. "Isn't that—" Beatrice looked like she was having a stroke. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. It was Vivian. But it wasn't the Vivian they knew. She didn't look down. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She looked straight ahead, her eyes locking instantly onto Preston across the room. She didn't smile. She just raised her chin slightly, acknowledging him like one acknowledges a bug on a windshield. Arthur Blackwood tucked Vivian's hand into the crook of his arm. "Shall we, Sienna?" Arthur asked, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Yes, grandfather," Vivian replied. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the hangar, smooth and commanding. "Let's go say hello to my ex-husband." The silence in the hangar was absolute, a stark contrast to the roar of the jet engines moments before. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the sound of Vivian's, no, Sienna's, heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. These were people who commanded armies of employees, people who owned islands, yet they stepped back with instinctual deference. The Blackwood name carried a weight that transcended mere wealth. It carried the weight of history, of empires built and toppled in silence. Arthur Blackwood walked with a limp, leaning heavily on his cane, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He looked at the gathered elite with a mixture of boredom and disdain. But when he looked at the woman on his arm, his expression softened to pride. Vivian walked with her head high. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. But 5 years of living with Beatrice Hayes had taught her how to wear a mask. She had learned to be invisible, to swallow insults, to be the good little wife. Tonight, she was burning the mask. They stopped directly in front of Preston, Beatrice, and Tiffany. The trio looked like a tableau of shock. Tiffany was clutching Preston's arm so hard her knuckles were white. Preston was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Beatrice, however, was turning a shade of purple that clashed violently with her dress. "Vivian!" Preston choked out, his voice cracking. "What? What is going on? How do you know Arthur Blackwood?" Vivian looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see the charming man she had fallen for in the diner 5 years ago. She saw a weak man in an expensive suit, a man who let his mother dictate his happiness. "I don't just know him, Preston," she said, her voice cool and melodious. "I am a Blackwood, Sienna Vivian Blackwood." "Impossible," Beatrice hissed, stepping forward. She pointed a shaking finger at Vivian. "This is a trick. She's an imposter. She's a waitress from Oregon who doesn't know which fork to use for a salad. She's hired this actor to embarrass us." Arthur Blackwood laughed. It was a dry, raspy sound. He didn't even look at Beatrice. He looked at the security guard standing nearby. "If this woman points that finger at my granddaughter one more time," Arthur said calmly, "break it." The security guards took a step forward. Beatrice recoiled, clutching her hand to her chest. "Granddaughter?" Tiffany squeaked. "But the Blackwood heiress disappeared 6 years ago. Everyone said she had a breakdown." "I didn't have a breakdown," Vivian said, her eyes sliding to Tiffany. "I had an awakening. I was tired of a world where people are judged by their net worth rather than their character. I wanted to see if I could be loved for who I was, not for the checkbook I carried." She turned her gaze back to Preston. Her eyes were full of a profound sadness that cut deeper than anger. "I walked away from billions, Preston. I changed my name. I waited tables. I lived in a studio apartment. And when I met you, I thought I had found it. I thought you loved me. Just Vivian, the girl who liked chess and bad coffee." Preston took a step toward her, his eyes wide. I did love you, Viv. I do." "No." She stopped him with a raised hand. "You loved the idea of saving someone. But the moment I became inconvenient for your mother, the moment I didn't fit into your image, you discarded me like trash. You cheated on me, Preston, in our bed." The crowd around them was listening with rapt attention. Phones were out, recording every second. This was the scandal of the decade. "I offered you a quiet divorce," Vivian continued, her voice hardening. "I asked for nothing. I would have disappeared, and you never would have known that you were married to the sole heir of the Blackwood fortune, but you couldn't just let me go. Could you? You had to humiliate me. You had to let your mother treat me like a thief or in my own home." Beatrice regained her composure, straightening her spine. She was a shark who smelled blood, even when she was the one bleeding. "So what?" Beatrice sneered. "So you have a rich grandfather. Congratulations. It doesn't change the fact that you're divorced. Preston is merging with the Sterling Group tonight. We are building an empire that even the Blackwoods will have to respect. You're just a relic of the past, darling. Go back to your jet." Vivian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just baited their opponent into a fatal trap. "The Sterling Group?" Vivian asked, looking over at Tiffany. "That's your father's company, right, Tiffany?" "Yes," Tiffany said haughtily, flipping her blonde hair. "And my daddy is going to crush anyone who gets in our way." "Is that so?" Vivian turned to Arthur. "Grandfather, do we have the file?" Arthur snapped his fingers. One of the aides behind him stepped forward and handed him a black leather portfolio. Arthur handed it to Vivian. "You see, Beatrice," Vivian said, opening the folder. "When I signed the divorce papers 2 weeks ago, I made a phone call. I told my grandfather that I was ready to come back to the family business, and do you know what the first thing I did was?" She pulled out a document and held it up. "I looked into the Sterling Group's finances." Tiffany frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's company is over-leveraged," Vivian explained, her voice projecting clearly. "He borrowed heavily to expand into Asia, and those markets crashed last quarter. He's desperate for this merger with Hayes Industries because he needs Preston's cash reserves to pay off his loans." "Lies!" Tiffany screamed. "The loans," Vivian continued, ignoring her, "were held by the Zurich Commercial Bank, a fine institution." She paused for effect. "Which the Blackwood Corporation acquired 3 days ago." The silence in the room changed texture. It went from shocked to terrified. "That means," Vivian said, closing the folder with a sharp snap, "that I own the debt. I own the Sterling Group's mortgages, their assets, and their future. And as of this morning, I have called in the loans." Beatrice's face went white. Preston looked at Tiffany, horrified. "Called in the loans?" Preston whispered. "But that would bankrupt them. The merger would be worthless." "Exactly," Vivian said. "There is no merger, Preston. You're about to sign a deal with a corpse." She took a step closer to Beatrice, towering over the older woman in her heels. "You wanted to talk about status, Beatrice? You wanted to talk about power. You just lost your biggest deal. Your son is about to be tied to a bankrupt family. And I?" She gestured to the massive jet behind her. "I'm just getting started." The gala descended into chaos. The reporters were in a frenzy, shouting questions. Tiffany was crying, frantically trying to call her father on her cell phone. Beatrice was yelling at the security to clear the room, but nobody was listening to her anymore. The power in the room had shifted physically toward the woman in the blue velvet dress. "Mr. Hayes," Arthur Blackwood's voice cut through the noise. "I suggest we take this conversation to a more private setting, unless you want your stock price to hit 0 before the markets open tomorrow." Preston nodded dumbly. He looked like a man waking up from a coma. Yes, let's go to the VIP lounge." 10 minutes later, the main players were seated around a glass table in the hangar's luxury suite overlooking the tarmac. The noise of the party was muffled here, but the tension was 10 times higher. On one side sat the Hayes faction. Preston, slumped and defeated. Beatrice, furious and pacing, and Tiffany, whose mascara was running down her face. On the other side sat the Blackwoods, Arthur, calm and imposing, and Vivian, who had crossed her legs and was sipping a glass of sparkling water. "Let's cut to the chase." Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. "You can't just call in the loans like that. There are grace periods. There are legal protocols." "There were," Vivian corrected. "But Mr. Sterling missed a covenant requirement last month. A technicality, really, but enough for the lender to demand immediate repayment. My lawyers are very thorough, Beatrice. You know that. You used to brag about how good your lawyers were when they were drafting my prenup." Beatrice flinched at the reminder. "What do you want?" Preston asked, his voice hollow. He looked at Vivian, his eyes searching for the woman he used to watch movies with on the couch. "Do you want money? Is this revenge?" "Revenge is a petty emotion, Preston," Vivian said. "This is business. But I admit, There is a certain poetic justice to it. She leaned forward, her expression shifting from cold to intense. This was the genius chess player coming out, the side of her she had suppressed for years because Preston found it intimidating when she beat him at board games. "Here is the situation," Vivian stated. "The Sterling Group is insolvent. If I foreclose, Tiffany's family loses everything. Their estates, their yachts, their company. And because you, Preston, signed a preliminary agreement to guarantee some of their debts in anticipation of this merger, something my analysts found in the public filings, Hayes Industries is exposed too." Preston buried his head in his hands. "I signed the guarantee last week. Mother insisted." "Of course she did," Vivian said dryly. "So, you're going to destroy us?" Beatrice whispered. The fight was draining out of her. She realized finally that she was outgunned. "I could," Vivian admitted. "I could snap my fingers, and by tomorrow morning, the Hayes name would be synonymous with failure. But I'm not you, Beatrice." Vivian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her grandfather's jet. "I have a proposal." "Anything," Preston said immediately. "Viv, please, I built this company. My father built it." "Your father was a good man," Vivian said softly. "He treated me with kindness the few times we met before he passed. For his sake, I will offer you a lifeline." She turned back to face them. "I will convert the Sterling debt into equity. The Blackwood Corporation will take controlling interest of the Sterling Group. We will restructure it. Tiffany's family can keep their homes, but they will have no say in the business." Tiffany sobbed loudly. "And as for Hayes Industries," Vivian continued, locking eyes with Preston, "I won't destroy you, but there is a condition." "What is it?" Preston asked. "We play a game," Vivian said. The room went silent. "A game?" Beatrice scoffed. "This isn't a kindergarten." "Chess," Vivian said. "One game. You and me, Preston. Like we used to play on rainy Sundays. If you win, I forgive the debt guarantee. You walk away with your company intact, and I leave New York. If I win—" She paused, her eyes glittering. "If I win, you resign as CEO of Hayes Industries. You give the seat to a board member of my choosing, and Beatrice moves out of the family estate and into a retirement community of my selection." "You can't be serious," Beatrice shrieked. "I will not live in a home." "It's a very nice community," Vivian said with a shrug. "In Florida. Far away from here." Preston looked at Vivian. He remembered those games. He remembered that he used to let her win, or so he thought. He had always assumed he was the better player, the Ivy League graduate against the waitress. But looking at her now, he realized he didn't know her at all. "Why chess?" Preston asked. "Because," Vivian said, walking back to the table and placing her hands on it. "For 5 years you treated me like a pawn, expendable, quiet, only there to protect the king. I want to show you what happens when a pawn makes it to the other side of the board." Arthur Blackwood smiled. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, portable chess set. It was made of ivory and obsidian. He placed it on the glass table. "Well, Mr. Hayes," Arthur challenged, "do you accept the wager? Or do we let the lawyers decimate your legacy by morning?" Preston looked at his mother, who was looking at him with desperate hope. He looked at Tiffany, who was useless to him now. He looked at the board. He had been captain of the chess club at Yale. He was good. Surely he could beat her. She was just Vivian. "I accept," Preston said, pulling out his chair. Vivian sat down opposite him. She didn't look at the pieces, she looked straight into his soul. "White moves first," she said. "Make your move, Preston." The atmosphere in the VIP lounge had shifted from a boardroom negotiation to something primal. It was no longer about assets, mergers, or stock options. It was a gladiatorial arena, shrank down to 64 squares of black and white. Preston Hayes adjusted his tie, the silk suddenly feeling like a noose around his neck. He looked at the board, then at Vivian. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her blue velvet dress pooling around the chair like deep water. Her expression was unreadable. The same blank, polite mask she used to wear when Beatrice insulted her cooking. But now there was a steeliness behind the eyes that terrified him. "You said white moves first," Preston said, his voice trying to find its old arrogance. "Fine." He reached out and moved his king's pawn to e4. It was the standard opening, aggressive, controlling the center. The move of a man who was used to dictating the terms of engagement. Vivian didn't hesitate. She moved her pawn to c5. The Sicilian defense. Preston smirked. "Aggressive. You used to play the French defense, passively waiting for me to make a mistake." "I'm not waiting anymore, Preston," she replied softly. The game progressed quickly at first. The click-clack of the ivory pieces against the obsidian board was the only sound in the room. Beatrice stood behind Preston, her hands gripping the back of his chair, her breathing ragged. Tiffany sat in the corner, scrolling through her phone, watching her social standing evaporate in real time on Twitter. Arthur Blackwood sat to the side, sipping an espresso that an aide had magically produced. He watched the board with the critical eye of a hawk. By the 10th move, Preston felt confident. He had developed his knights, controlled the center, and castled his king to safety. Vivian's pieces seemed scattered, her structure chaotic. She had moved her queen out early, a rookie mistake, or so he thought. "You're exposed, Viv," Preston said, moving his bishop to pin her knight. "Check your flank. You always forget to watch the diagonals." "Do I?" Vivian asked. She reached out, her fingers brushing the top of her rook. She didn't move the knight to safety. Instead, she pushed a pawn on the opposite side of the board. Preston frowned. It seemed like a wasted move, a distraction. "Ignore it," Beatrice whispered in his ear. "Attack her queen. She's left it wide open." Preston nodded. He launched his attack. He moved his knight to d5, forking her queen and her bishop. It was a brutal move. He looked up, expecting to see panic in her eyes. He expected to see the waitress who dropped dishes when she was nervous. Instead, Vivian smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Do you remember our 3rd anniversary, Preston?" she asked, her voice conversational, as if they weren't playing for his entire life's work. Preston paused, his hand hovering over the board. "What? Why are you bringing that up now?" "We went to that French restaurant in the city, the one your mother liked," Vivian continued, finally moving her queen. But she didn't retreat. She moved it deeper into enemy territory, placing it on a square that looked suicidal. "You spent the entire dinner on your phone, emailing your assistant about the acquisition of the Dover account. You didn't speak to me once until the dessert came." "I was busy, Vivian. I was building a future for us." "No," she corrected him, taking his bishop with a swift snap of her wrist. "You were building a future for yourself. I was just an accessory, like a watch or a set of cufflinks." Preston stared at the board. Her queen took his bishop, but now his rook was open to take her. It was a bait. It had to be. But if he didn't take it, she would tear apart his defensive line. He took the queen. "Got to you." Preston exhaled, a rush of adrenaline hitting him. "Queen down. It's over, Viv. You can't win without your queen." Beatrice let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. "See? She's an amateur, just like in life. She overreached." Vivian didn't look at the board where her queen had just been removed. She looked at Preston. That's your problem, Preston. You think power comes from the title. You think because you took the Queen, you've won the war. You forget about the little people, the ones who do the actual work. She reached out and touched a single humble pawn, the pawn she had moved earlier, the wasted move. She pushed it forward. Preston frowned. He looked at the board. The pawn was threatening his knight, annoying but not fatal. He moved the knight away. Vivian pushed the pawn again. Preston's eyes narrowed. He brought his rook over to block it. Vivian sacrificed her knight to clear the path. "What are you doing?" Preston snapped, sweat beginning to bead on his upper lip. "You're throwing away pieces." "I'm making space," she said calmly. Turn by turn, the dynamic of the board shifted. Preston had the material advantage. He had more pieces, stronger pieces. But his pieces were uncoordinated, tripping over each other, trapped in their own arrogance. Vivian's pieces, few as they were working in perfect, lethal harmony. And that single pawn kept marching. 1 square, 2 squares. Preston threw everything he had at it. He sacrificed his own bishop to stop it. He brought his king out to block it. But Vivian was 3 steps ahead. Every time he tried to block the pawn, one of her other pieces, a bishop lurking in the shadows, a rook he had forgotten about, would slice through his defenses, forcing him to move. She was herding him. "Stop it!" Beatrice hissed, her nails digging into Preston's shoulder. "Don't let that pawn promote. If she gets a queen back, you're done." "I know, Mother," Preston shouted, his composure shattering. He stared at the board, his mind racing. The complex geometrical patterns were swimming before his eyes. He looked at Vivian. She wasn't looking at the board anymore. She was watching him, dissecting him. "You never asked me about my grandfather," Vivian said quietly. "In 5 years. You knew I was an orphan, but you never asked about my lineage. You assumed I came from nothing because I asked for nothing." She moved her rook to h1. Check. Preston's king was forced to move. He had only 1 square left. Ideally, he wanted to retreat, but her bishop blocked the path. He was forced to step aside, directly into the path of the pawn. "I didn't care where you came from," Preston lied, his voice trembling. "You cared," she said. "You loved that I came from nothing. It made you feel big. It made you feel like a savior. But you can't save someone who doesn't need saving, Preston." She reached for the pawn. It was sitting on the 7th rank, 1 square away from the end of the board, 1 square away from transformation. Preston looked at his defenses. He had nothing left. His rook was pinned. His queen was on the other side of the board, useless. His king was trapped against the edge. "Don't," Preston whispered. Vivian picked up the pawn. She moved it to the final square. "Promotion," she declared. Arthur Blackwood handed her a captured piece from the side of the table. A queen. Vivian placed the new queen on the board. "Checkmate." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Preston stared at the board. He blinked, trying to find a way out. He mentally retraced the moves. "If I go here, no, the bishop. If I go there, no. The new queen." There was no escape. The king was dead. He had been beaten by a pawn that he had ignored 10 moves ago. Preston slumped back in his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a painful wheeze. He looked up at Vivian, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and horror. He realized for the first time that the woman he had married was a stranger, a brilliant, terrifying stranger. I lost," he muttered. "Yes," Vivian said, standing up. She didn't gloat. She didn't cheer. She simply smoothed down her dress. "You did." Beatrice let out a strangled cry. "No, that doesn't count. She cheated. She distracted him." Arthur Blackwood stood up. his cane hitting the floor with a decisive thud. "The game was fair, Mrs. Hayes," Arthur said, his voice like grinding gravel. "Your son accepted the terms, and the Blackwoods always collect their debts." Arthur signalled to the back of the room. Two men in dark grey suits entered. They weren't security guards. They carried briefcases embossed with the logo of Sullivan and Cromwell, one of the most prestigious law firms in the world. "The papers are ready," Arthur said. Vivian looked down at Preston, who was still staring at the chessboard, unable to comprehend his fall. "Sign them, Preston," Vivian said, "like I signed mine, quietly." The resignation of Preston Hayes was the fastest corporate decapitation in the history of Wall Street. The lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell didn't speak. They simply laid the documents out on the glass table, covering the chessboard that still displayed Preston's humiliation. The documents were brutal in their efficiency. They stripped Preston of his CEO title, his voting rights, and his seat on the board. He retained his shares. Vivian was not a thief, but they were placed in a blind trust controlled by the Blackwood Corporation. He would be rich, yes, but he would be powerless, a passenger in his own car. Preston signed with a shaking hand. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "And now regarding the residential clause," the lead attorney said, turning a page. Beatrice Hayes, who had been sobbing into a handkerchief, looked up with venomous eyes. "I am not going anywhere. This is my house. My husband built it. Your husband left it to Preston," the lawyer corrected calmly. "And Preston has just transferred the deed to the trust as collateral for the debt restructuring. As the new controlling entity, we have determined that the estate requires renovation." "Renovation?" Beatrice screeched. "You have 48 hours to vacate," Vivian said. She was standing by the window again, looking out at the night sky. She couldn't bear to look at them anymore. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like cleaning a wound. Necessary, but painful. "Preston!" Beatrice grabbed her son's arm. "Do something! She is evicting your mother!" Preston gently peeled his mother's fingers off his arm. He didn't look at her. "I can't do anything, Mother. You wanted the merger. You wanted the status. This is the price. I did it for you." "No," Preston said, his voice barely a whisper. "You did it for you, and I let you." The realization seemed to break Beatrice. She slumped into a chair, finally silent. "Now," Vivian said, turning around. "The matter of the new CEO." Preston looked up. "Who is it? Who are you putting in my chair? Some Blackwood lackey?" "No," Vivian said. "Someone who knows Hayes Industries better than you do. Someone who actually cared about the workers, the product, and the ethics of the company. Someone you fired 3 years ago because he refused to cut corners on the safety testing for the new engine prototypes." Preston's eyes widened. "No. You can't mean—" The door to the VIP lounge opened. A man walked in. He was in his late 30s, wearing a suit that was neat, but clearly off the rack, a sharp contrast to the bespoke Italian wool in the room. He had a rugged face, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of quiet competence. Lucas Mercer. Preston recoiled as if he had seen a ghost. Lucas had been the chief engineer, a brilliant mind who had been the heart of the company until Preston fired him to save 4% on the quarterly budget. "Hello, Preston," Lucas said, his voice steady. He didn't look angry. He looked ready to work. "Lucas is the new CEO," Vivian announced. "He has full operational control. He reports to the Blackwood board, specifically to me." "He's an engineer," Preston spat. "He's not a businessman." "Exactly," Vivian said. "That's why the company will survive. Because he cares about what you build, not just what you sell." Lucas nodded to Vivian. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood. I've already reviewed the Sterling merger documents. We're cancelling the toxic assets and refocusing on the core aviation division. We can save the jobs. Good, Vivian said. Get to work, Lucas. She walked past Preston, past the sobbing Tiffany, past the broken Beatrice. She signaled to her grandfather. Are we finished here, Sienna? Arthur asked, offering her his arm. Yes, grandfather, she said. We're done. They walked out of the lounge, leaving the wreckage of the Hayes dynasty behind them. As they emerged back into the main hangar, the party had largely dispersed. The rumors had spread like wildfire, and the guests, sensing the shift in power, had fled to avoid the fallout. Only the cleaning crews and a few lingering reporters remained. The paparazzi who were left went wild as Vivian and Arthur descended the stairs. Flashes popped like lightning. "Miss Blackwood! Miss Blackwood!" a reporter from the Wall Street Journal shouted. "Is it true you've taken over Hayes Industries? Is it true you were working as a waitress?" Vivian stopped on the red carpet. The wind from the tarmac whipped her hair around her face. She looked directly into the camera lens. "It's true," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And let this be a lesson to everyone in this city. Never underestimate the person serving your coffee. You never know when they might be the one signing your paycheck." She turned and walked toward the jet. The engines of the Gulfstream G700 were already spooling up, a high-pitched whine that promised escape. The air stairs were down, bathed in soft LED lighting. Vivian paused at the bottom of the stairs. She looked back at the hangar one last time. She saw Preston standing in the window of the VIP lounge, looking down at her. He looked small, insignificant. A wave of relief washed over her. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. The girl who had cried in the bathroom because her husband forgot her birthday was gone. "Are you okay?" Arthur asked gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I am," Vivian said, and she meant it. "I feel lighter." "You played a magnificent game, Sienna," Arthur said. "Your father would have been proud." "I know," she smiled. She started to climb the stairs, but just as she reached the top, a black town car screeched onto the tarmac, bypassing security. It skidded to a halt near the jet. The door flew open, and a man stepped out. He wasn't Preston. He wasn't anyone from the Hayes faction. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that burned with an intensity that rivaled the jet engines. He wore a tuxedo, but he wore it with the casual disregard of a man who owned the room he walked into. Gabriel Stone. Vivian froze at the top of the stairs, her breath caught in her throat. Gabriel Stone was a corporate raider, a man known in the industry as the Undertaker, because he bought dying companies and stripped them for parts. He was ruthless, dangerous, and, according to the tabloids, heartless. He was also the only man Vivian had ever met who could beat her at chess. They had played once, years ago, at a charity event in London before she went into hiding. It was a draw. "Going somewhere, Sienna?" Gabriel called out, his voice carrying over the tarmac. Arthur stiffened. "Stone, what do you want?" Gabriel ignored Arthur. He walked right up to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at Vivian. His eyes scanned her blue velvet dress, a spark of appreciation, or was it challenge, in his gaze. "I heard you were back from the dead," Gabriel said, a smirk playing on his lips. "And I heard you just ate Preston Hayes for breakfast. Impressive." "I'm busy, Gabriel," Vivian said, coolly, though her pulse had quickened. "I have a flight to catch." "To Zurich," Gabriel guessed. "To finalize the sterling acquisition?" "Maybe." "You're going to need help," Gabriel said. "The sterling books are cooked worse than you think. There are hidden liabilities in the Cayman Islands. If you sign those papers as they are, you'll be buying a bomb." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "How do you know that?" Gabriel shrugged. "Because I was going to buy them myself next week. But you beat me to it." He reached into his jacket pocket. The security guards on the jet tense, hands moving to their holsters. But Gabriel only pulled out a business card. He flicked it onto the step just below her feet. "Call me," Gabriel said, "unless you want your first act as CEO to be a billion-dollar mistake." He winked, turned around, and walked back to his car without waiting for an answer. Vivian stared at his retreating back. Gabriel Stone, the most dangerous man in finance, and he had just offered her a warning. "He's trouble, Sienna," Arthur warned, eyeing the card. "He's a shark." Vivian bent down and picked up the card. It was heavy, black cardstock with gold lettering, just a name and a number. She looked at the car driving away, then at the card in her hand. A small thrill went through her. She was done with weak men like Preston. She was done with being the victim. If she was going to rule an empire, maybe she needed a shark. She tucked the card into the bodice of her dress. "I know he is, grandfather," Vivian said, a new fire igniting in her eyes. "But so am I." She stepped into the cabin, and the heavy door of the Gulf Stream sealed shut, locking out the noise, the rain, and her past. As the jet taxied toward the runway, ready to soar into the night sky, Vivian Hayes ceased to exist completely. Sienna Blackwood was finally flying high. The private office of the Blackwood Corporation in Zurich was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above the snowy streets of the Swiss banking district. From her desk, Sienna Blackwood could see the Alps in the distance, sharp and unyielding against the grey sky. It had been 3 days since the gala in New York, 3 days since she had left Vivian Hayes on the tarmac and reclaimed her birthright. Sienna sat surrounded by stacks of documents. Her grandfather, Arthur, sat by the fireplace, watching her with quiet approval. He had formally stepped down as chairman that morning, naming Sienna as his successor. The board had voted unanimously in her favor. Fear, after all, was a powerful motivator. "You've been staring at that file for an hour," Arthur noted, his voice breaking the silence. "The Sterling acquisition is ready to close. The lawyers are waiting." Sienna didn't look up. Her finger traced a line of numbers on the spreadsheet in front of her. It was a subsidiary report for a shell company based in the Cayman Islands, a company buried so deep in the Sterling Group's paperwork that 3 different audit teams had missed it. "Gabriel was right," she whispered. Arthur frowned. "Stone? What are you talking about?" "The bomb," Sienna said, sliding the folder across the massive ebony desk. "Look at this, grandfather. The Sterling Group didn't just borrow from us. They cross-collateralized their intellectual property with a shadow bank in Russia. If we had signed the deal as it was, we wouldn't just be buying their debt. We would be liable for laundering sanctions." Arthur picked up the file, his eyes widening as he scanned the data. He paled. "My God, that would have frozen our assets in the EU. It would have been catastrophic." "Gabriel Stone knew," Sienna said, leaning back in her chair. She spun the black business card between her fingers. "He warned me. He saved us billions." "Why?" Arthur asked, suspicious. "Stone doesn't do favors. He destroys competition." "Maybe he doesn't see me as competition," Sienna mused, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Or maybe he sees me as the only competition worth having." She picked up her phone. She didn't hesitate this time. She dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find the Russian connection," Gabriel's deep voice answered. "No hello. No pleasantries. Just business." 3 days, Sienna replied smoothly. "Your intel was solid, Stone. I've restructured the deal to carve out the toxic assets. The acquisition goes through in an hour. Clean." "Impressive," Gabriel said. She could hear the smile in his voice. Most people would have just signed and hoped for the best. "I'm not most people," Sienna said. "I'm the woman who beat you at chess in London." "A draw," Gabriel corrected instantly. "It was a draw, Sienna." "Keep telling yourself that," she laughed. It was the first time she had laughed genuinely in years. "So what do you want in return? A cut of the deal? A favor?" "Dinner," Gabriel said. Sienna paused. "Dinner. Paris. Next Saturday. There's a new restaurant in the first arrondissement. I want to see if you handle a wine list as well as you handle a hostile takeover." Sienna looked out at the snow-covered mountains. She thought about Preston, who was currently sitting in a rented apartment in New Jersey, stripped of his power, living off an allowance she controlled. She thought about Beatrice, furiously knitting in a retirement home in Boca Raton. She had spent 5 years making herself small to fit into a small man's world. She was done shrinking. "I prefer Italian," Sienna said. "Rome. Friday night." There was a pause on the other line. "Rome it is," Gabriel said. "I'll send the jet." "Don't bother," Sienna said, looking at the blackwood crest on the wall. "I have my own." She hung up the phone and stood up. She walked to the window, her reflection staring back at her. Strong, powerful, and finally, free. The silence of the divorce was over. The roar of her life had just begun. And that is how the underestimated waitress checkmated the billionaire and took back her crown. What a ride. I have to ask you guys, would you have forgiven Preston if he begged for a second chance, or was his punishment exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and power, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new dramas every week, and trust me, the next one is even crazier. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.